Hi guys, how are you? Welcome to Fabricating Futures. It's great to see you all here. If anybody wants to come down the front, there are some good looking seats down the front that need you to sit there. My name's Fenella Kernebone. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about the robotic revolution in architecture and design. It sounds dramatic, it is fantastic, and downstairs afterwards you'll have a chance to have a look. If you haven't seen it already, the exhibition, and you can go get a drink. What can you get as an espresso martini?
Oh, no, there'll be
more.
Selection.
Whole selection of drinks. A pina colada maybe from the Bot Bar. So we'll talk about that and everything else. Of course, today exploring the challenges and the developments surrounding robotic integration into architecture, art, design. We're going to talk about robots that dance, robots that draw, robots taking over the world. Who knows what we're going to talk about today. And yes, and questions too. So we'll have a conversation for a while. But if there's a point in this conversation over the next hour where you go, I must ask Hank a question, put your hands in the air like you just don't care, and go crazy. But we will have some time at the end for questions too. So that's it. We're going to be talking about robotics and architecture and design and everything in between. And I'm really pleased to have experts on the panel because I am not an expert in this subject. But on the panel joining me are four very intelligent people who will fill us all in on their great ideas. On my right is Marjo Niemelä, who is the manager of the DMAF lab. Is that how you say it? DMAF, here at the Faculty of Architecture, and is the brains behind the Bot Bar. She'll talk about education, the whole thing. On my left is Professor John McCormack, who is the director of Sensi Lab at Monash University. He's an electronic media artist, and he's arrived today from Melbourne, so welcome to you. Dagmar Reinhardt, Dr. Dagmar Reinhardt, welcome to you too. He's the program director of the BAE and studio leader of the Master of Digital Architecture Research. Is that right? Yes. And a bunch of other things too. And also Hank Hauessler.
Hello.
G'day. He's from UNSW, Senior Lecturer and Discipline Director of Computational Design. Code. Can we give them a big round of applause? Welcome to them. So this might seem... We're going to have a pretty of a rolling conversation here, so we'll see where we go, but I wanted to just start off really basic and to ask, what the hell is a robot? What is a robot? There's lots of different examples downstairs. John, what's a robot?
That is a very interesting question.
That's every question I ask.
They're all very interesting so far.
Thank you.
I think everyone has a perception of what a robot is that largely comes from film and television about robots being humanoid-like. If you've seen the recent film Interstellar, there was a slightly different take on robots in that film, perhaps slightly more realistic about not having the same attributes that humans do. But I think in a nutshell, a robot is something that is different than a machine because it has some degree of autonomy. That is, that it can make decisions or do things without a person directing every single move that it does.
Do you agree, Hank, with that description?
Yeah, but
is there more?
Yeah, no, I think it's fairly kind of a good, accurate description of it. When you have any kind of a machine that is able to sense with sensors what's going on in the built environment, process those kind of informations, and then have a feedback again, or respond to those information, or display certain things, or act upon them, I think that's pretty much a machine. And I would say your washing machine back home is in that definition of robot.
A washing machine's a robot?
Machine,
Really? What about the dryer?
Yeah, same. But the washing machine can measure how much load you got in there, decides then how much water goes in there. You have an input system that defines how much washing programs, or what kind of washing program you're going to use, spins and gives you a feedback system and it's finished. So that's a machine as well. So I think robots in that sense have taken already over the world.
They've taken over the world and they're washing our clothes. Thank God for that. I had to do it myself. Marjo, agree?
I'm always in two minds about this. I can argue both sides. I think I've often said a CNC router is not a robot, but according to your definition, a CNC router
Be a robot?
Be a robot. And I argued. Lost the argument with myself this morning when I said that now that we made the CNC downstairs into a skill tester, we've actually made it a robot because we hacked it and gave it a different function. But I'm yet to be decided on the definition.
But these types of questions, even so basic, you guys are thinking whether that's a robot or not. Why is that kind of telling, Dagmar, to even think about it, that there's still a debate really about what essentially a robot is?
Well, I think I would address it sort of from a slightly different way, because, and I'm interested in that conversation that you did. As the sort of first sentence you put out, it's the robot that's sensing, because I haven't really, or that's probably where we can have a really nice argument. I didn't really see it that way. So we've been trying to put up the robotics lab, or we started the robotics lab here at the Faculty of Architecture in 2013, and so I would basically say in this whole sort of 2.5 years that we've now been working with it, it was very much not sensing, and it was very much not interacting. So all that we've been doing is to go through very precise, very time-consuming processes to make it actually to talk to it, to make it understand what we want from it. And being a Faculty of Architecture, of course, what we want is to relate it in one way or the other back to architecture, right? So we've been using it for processes like drawing, or we've been using it for processes like 3D printing, or for cutting joints. But all of that was really directed towards how can this possibly help us to produce elements of space in a different manner, or to shape spaces in such a manner that they would be different than what we could produce with basically manually labor. But everything was like the robot non-sensing, the robot not being intelligent. We're very, very carefully crafting out the working processes, make the hammer intelligent in a way, so that we could fabricate the things that we would take for granted in construction processes or in design processes.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into that as well. I mean, even listening to what you have to say, and also Hank as well, I'm kind of curious, do you think that I mean, you guys know what robots are because you're talking about it, you're researching it, but do you think that our understanding is very strong, I suppose? I mean, you were talking to me the other day about how we barely even understand what we have in our hands
Yes,
in terms of technology.
So the robots you've been using in the lab downstairs is a technology that's over 40 years old. And most people probably will not be so surprised to see a robot like that, maybe not in the street, but in a workshop kind of environment. Everybody who works in industry probably has seen a robot at some stage. For me, coming from Germany, from Stuttgart, Mercedes-Benz, we had a tour when we was a kid, 10 years old, seeing robot arms assembling kind of cars there. I think the more surprising thing with robots is the robot or the machine we have all in our pockets. So how many of you have a smartphone? Don't be embarrassed, come on, just raise your hand. I don't have a smartphone.
Who does not have a smartphone? Who's using a Nokia brick?
Well, 100% of all kind of people got a robot, in the definition I said before, in their kind of pocket. They can sense, they can process information, display information. Within a period of how many years did that happen? When was the smartphone invented? Oh, really? Who was that? 2007. 2007, the smartphone came out of the market. So within 7 years, we managed from having no smartphones to 100% in the room smartphones. So if you imagine now any other kind of major invention like the car was invented by my fellow Germans near Stuttgart. No promotion here.
I thought it was the Austrians.
No. In 1895, something like that. Don't quote me on that now. But within 7 years, not 100% of the population had a car. So I think for me, interesting, the kind of robot thing and having the environment where everybody has a robot-like kind of tool in their kind of pocket has just completely overrun us. 7 years from zero to hero. And I think that's the robot revolution I see by far more, and the impacts of those kind of sensors and technology in there that will drive in the future the robot revolution architecture will have with using a robot as a fabrication kind of process.
Do you agree, Joy?
To a point.
Yes.
I think it's quite a utopian view.
He's from Melbourne, so.
Yeah, I'm from Melbourne, so that's why I'm wearing black. I mean, smartphones actually have been around longer than 2007. Apple had a device called the Newton, which I remember seeing in the 90s, which did a lot of stuff that the first iPhone did. And there were lots of other prototypes from Motorola and other companies before then. But, I mean, I would think of that more as a computer, not as a robot. I think something about robots is that they can do things in the physical world. They can move something or push something or change something physically. I mean, I think the simplest robot under that definition is something like the thermostat in your heater. It's actually able to turn the heater on and off and make a decision about when to do that. And so, yeah, look, everyone I think knows there's this massive change in technology, and it's completely changed the way that we mediate our social relations, our intimate relations, and our work relations with each other, and that's happened in a very short period of time. And we're just on the verge now of having robot cars, for example, cars that know how to drive themselves and how to park themselves and how to avoid accidents and things. And we're likely to see a lot more of that kind of integration. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We're increased, technology is certainly accelerating. But the bigger question is, what does it really mean for humans? What changes? Because the people who design the technology don't really think about the implications, the long-term implications. And long-term meaning 6 months or a year after something's released, what's actually going to happen.
And you have to also build the infrastructure to support the new technologies that you're talking about.
Yeah, and we are doing that. We've got massive wireless networks now all over the world. I mean, you can take your mobile phone, you can travel overseas, and just about anywhere in the world you can just turn it on and it works, which is...
It's just a bit slower in Australia with our current system.
Yeah, and it's more expensive. And, the internet was... It started off as a defence project in the 1960s, and, people can't imagine... I mean... anyone born after about the year 2000 probably can't imagine what life is like without the internet. I've got kids who are, I've got one child who was born in 2000 and she's just grown up using the internet since that time. And, whenever we go away on holiday and the internet's not allowed, it's like she goes into like a kind of quite a shock state. It takes several weeks to overcome the fact that you can't just talk to your friends anymore. So
Talk to daddy all the time.
Yeah, you have to. Well, that's boring.
We'll talk about this, but in the future, if I have a child who has a child who has a child, they'll grow up with a robot of some kind that'll be living in their homes.
Yeah,
It'll be a whole other thing that we have to deal with at that time.
Yeah, I think definitely we'll be looking in the near future. I mean, already this is starting to happen overseas. Is having robots that take care of us, particularly with an ageing population. Having robots that look after the elderly or the infirmed or the sick. Robots as companions rather than pets that we have now. Are all highly likely. But I think there'll be also lots of other robots that we don't think of as being robots in the traditional sense as well.
Sorry, do you want to have a robot care for you when you're sick?
I might have a choice. I think it depends on how good the robot is at looking after me.
Yeah. Or how good the robot is looking.
Yeah.
For that particular.
You wouldn't want a robot to look after you?
Well,
I mean, we're considering the fact that we have an ageing population globally, and there's not enough people to look after or care for it.
I think it may be potentially a moment where you would say, if this is only something that delivers service, then the clear answer is no. If this is something that delivers empathy, possibly. Empathy and understanding. This is why I'm so interested in your idea of sort of the sensing, the responsive robot, or the idea of working with a robot. But I've just looked at Ex Machina, and that's just so mind-blowing. Because it's sort of like this empathy. Maybe there's no empathy, right? I mean, maybe if we train them, maybe if we care for them, and maybe if we construct them in such a way that they are as clever and intelligent that they can behave, maybe they're just abandon us at some moment.
But it's an interesting kind of thing, whatever most robots in movie try to kill you.
Well, no,
Not all of them.
Just famous robots. R2-D2, okay, doesn't kill you. Terminator definitely wants to kill you.
But he didn't later. He came
9000.
back in episode 2, which is the better film, of course, as you know. Yeah. But he was nice then.
And we're talking about Big Hero 6 here.
Yeah.
But if anyone's seen the Spike Jonze film Her, has anybody seen that film? So the robot or the artificial intelligence is not threatening in the traditional, macho kind of robotic mechanical sense. It's threatening in an emotional sense because people develop massive emotional attachments, and the robot is actually better at human emotions than humans are. And I think that's the kind of space that we're starting to enter now, where we're starting to see people form relationships with machines that are not about force or war or killing. I mean, they're used for that too. But in a social context, they're used to get that empathy.
People are starting to form relationship with technology in all different ways I found it quite perturbing that what happened with who gave the free song? You two?
You too.
Oh, when you two
Yeah.
gave us
When-
all that album.
Yeah,
It was a whole album.
Yeah, sorry,
Were
the
you
whole
lucky?
album. And how people were just so upset about the fact that their property had been invaded by this album. So we've already developed this attachment to
Well, people go to sleep with their mobile phone next to them. The idea of not actually having it with you in the bedroom is a horrifying concept for it. Who does not have their phone in their room when they go to sleep? That's so amazing.
You probably
Good
did
on
ones who
you.
didn't have an iPhone at the start.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have, but okay, so maybe on that point, we'll talk about design and architecture more, trust me, but maybe on that point, do you think therefore that the tech companies that are developing these robots that supposedly we form attachments to, John, that you're talking about, do they have a moral responsibility then to upkeep and maintain in the future? Because I know there's that funny little dog that in Japan called
Aibo.
who everybody was, you know, they stopped making it, and now people have to sort of hack the thing because they fell in love with their dogs.
Yeah, look, I think they do. I don't know if they actually do have a strong moral sense. I mean, Google's initial vision was don't do anything wrong or something like that. Do no
Don't
evil.
evil, yeah.
Don't be evil.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they're probably the most evil company in the world. There was many years ago. There was a computer game called Creatures. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this, but they were sort of like artificial life kind of creatures, and people started doing. They had sort of anthropomorphic or human-like behaviours, and people started doing things like torturing them and things because they felt that there was this distance between them and something that was virtual. But I think with robotics now, when you're bringing physical objects into the world, that attachment suddenly becomes much more visceral and much more engaging than it does with something that's on a screen that you can just turn off.
But there's some really interesting studies about how humans are interacting with robots. I was reading about this the other day, trying to test whether or not we will hurt a robot if it's nice to us or something like that. So, you know, our interaction, the human-robot interaction is something that's, because you were saying this before, Hank, it's really early days. I mean, you know, 10 years since I owned a smartphone. Yeah. But we're sort of only at the beginning, really, of truly understanding how we're going to live with these machines that we already have around us.
Definitely, there's a term called uncanny valley that describes sort of a curve how much a robot becomes creepy to you, and then the creepiness kind of changes again and becomes kind of normal. So I think it really depends what a robot is, and I think it's quite good before we said, okay, now this is a computer, and a computer is kind of different, and I think there's two different kind of ways to have a computer and a robot in the built environment. The one is where a robot, and that's mainly the robot fabrication we've got downstairs, fabricate space, built environment. And there's the other kind of thing where you've got robot or computer intelligence in a building, in a built environment, which could be the smartphone, which could be sensors and kind of electronics. So I think from the original kind of question, what is a robot, we already solved that partially to say a robot is then when it's a physical, cyber-physical kind of system that can move certain kind of things and can operate certain things. A smartphone can be excluded in kind of discussion because that's not what fabrication really is.
So let's talk about fabrication. Downstairs there's the robot arm. You mentioned it before. It comes from the automotive industry. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's an old technology that we're all pretty used to seeing, and the idea is it just does the same job again and again and again on the factory floor. And then transferring it now to design and architecture, it's quite a different playing field.
So KUKA, or ABB, KUKA was bought as a kind of company in Augsburg, not near Stuttgart where I'm from, but a little bit further away, who've been owned by the Quant family. Quant family is the owner of BMW, so they bought that kind of machine tool kind of company, KUKA, and obviously had in mind to produce a robot or a mechanical kind of system that helped them with car manufacturing. So I think my criticism with kind of robot arms in architecture is that they've been originally kind of purposed and designed for a completely different kind of environment than where we want to use them at the moment. So in a car manufacturing environment, the tool stays on one side. The factory where assemble thing is also one side, the car factory or the assembly factory. And then the object you want to design and want to build comes constantly to that kind of point. Completely different in the construction industry, where the tool moves to a location, the design is happening at a location, and that location changes constantly. So suddenly it makes it quite difficult to move a robot arm from one place to the other, and they haven't really particularly designed to be in a different kind of place all the time. So
you're simply adapting a tool that was used for an entirely different purpose for something that is quite difficult. But there are some areas where it can work, and there's evidence, Dagmar, your research downstairs with, with curves and acoustics is an example where you can use the traditional robot arm to create.
I think that's the if you would say design evolution that we've been going through is really from the automation of prefabricated designs, which are just precisely 1 million times repeated in a very good and optimized time, towards designs that we can execute with the smallest variations in order to continue to complete a whole. So there's a lot of design scope that we can enable by these robotic fabrication processes. But what you've been seeing downstairs there is also something that can be, which we couldn't have done before, is to produce acoustic patterns which are crafted in such a manner that they actually scatter sound. So it's a real test study that we're undertaking for physical prototypes of acoustic panels, which will have a very good effect for existing spaces.
So why is it better than perhaps what you could design yourself using?
It would take a lot of manual labor in order to execute these crafted curves in such a way, and you would never have that precision. And you would also have not that possibility of pattern variation in order to produce then the desired results.
Okay, and it's pretty.
And it's pretty. Yeah, of course it's pretty.
Which is the most important thing as well. So that kind of precision allows for new ideas or new ways of obviously fabricating in design and construction. So, but what are some of the other? Sorry, Marjo.
Well, I could add to that. I think we can all accept that industrial robot arms have been around for a long time, and they were designed to do something over and over and over again. But architects and designers in general. We do have some people in the design lab who will disagree with this, but most of the people in this building and the industry that we work in cannot design or make robots. We have to use what's available to us. And
you should just try harder.
But that's not what we're here for. We're here to...
Yeah, I know.
So it's not the job of the architect to design a robot. It's, we try to find ways of doing the things that we do in a more clever way. The industrial robot arm, although it has its limitations, and there are many limitations, I think we have done a lot that we wouldn't have been able to do without them. So it's, yeah.
And so architects...
I will defend those arms.
Yeah, that's cool. But and architects and designers are embracing the technology. Obviously, in an educational institution, there are great opportunities here. But where is it happening in the real world, like out there, over there?
Well, they do have them in architecture offices. So Snowhatter is which is a Finnish firm working. Sorry. Norwegian firm, sorry, is working with these robots in an architecture office environment. So it's very, very precisely linked to the design process itself. So that's something that's interesting. And then, of course, there's mobile robotics, which go on site, where we're still sort of running into problems, obviously, with a robot that sits in an environment for which it's not made for.
So what are the kinds of problems that you encounter?
Well, just the very apparent ones. How does the robot then work with a human? Because the robot has a robot reach, and the robot doesn't stop just because, unless he's sensing, because a human steps into his work path.
Well, except the new robot, which we haven't seen yet. We're just about to see in November. We'll be able to one from KUKA, so we'll have sensors and know that it needs to stop the human.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting kind of part of the robot can co-work with somebody, and that's where the manufacturing industry is looking at the moment in Industry 4.0 principles, where you got a robot. It's not just a tool; it's a co-worker. So you and the robot work together. The robot has a sensing capacity, so it suddenly goes back to what a smartphone can do with sensors to understand who's around. You also can teach the robot. So seeing the robot downstairs with the cocktail shaker and going individually to individual bottles to mix up that kind of drink would be, with a collaborative robot, it's by far easier, because you take the robot arm, put it underneath the bottle, go to the next kind of bottle, go to the next kind of bottle, shake the robot arm, and then the robot understands that kind of process and can replicate that.
The limitation with all those robots, to my knowledge, is that we then wouldn't be able to use that same technology. tasks. And because of the fabrication side of what we do in this faculty, we've chosen to go with industrial robot arms rather than the ones that you can move around. Yeah. So they're not able to do the rest of the things that we want them to do.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about robotics, what it does bring that's really new, is even though it comes from originally this idea of mass production, that we were automating tasks that humans were just found difficult or boring or tiring to do, we're now entering an age of mass personalisation, where every individual item that the robot makes can be different, and it can be customised and tailored to a particular person's wants, desires, needs, advertising budget, or whatever it is. And that's not going to cost any more than it does. At the moment, we think about anything that's bespoke as being expensive and personalised and the product of an individual, but what about if we have factories that are turning out objects that are personalised to each individual who ordered them? That's quite possible now. I think that's one thing that's really exciting about what robotics can bring.
So it's also a reduction in the amount of waste, it's more sustainable,
Yes.
a bunch of other kind of
Yeah.
things
So
emerge from that.
there's a lot of work that's done in this area in computer science called optimization, which is really about how you can utilise the materials in the best way so that you minimise the amount of waste. And even just small changes, if you're talking about producing millions or hundreds of millions of things, just a small change can result in massive differences in the materials that are saved, the costs, the money that can be spent on other things. So it's actually really, really powerful thing that not many people know about, but it has a huge impact.
Yeah. Other elements, of course, that I find quite fascinating, and Dagmar, this is something that you were talking with me about the other day, is this idea that it can, through robotics in architecture and design, you can bring skills, so traditional craftsmanship, into architecture that might have been lost, whether it's stone cutting skills or other things like that. Can you talk through that?
Yes. We've been looking at the stone cutting as something that is really interesting because it's a very, very old craft. There's a couple of people who are researching that here in the faculty. It is interesting because I think in every architect there's this desire to produce something that remains long after death, or at least that's for me personally.
It's kind of a nice goal, really, isn't it?
So it's like I think there's this wish to sort of build these cathedrals, which we can't really produce anymore because we don't have that craftsmanship, which we don't allow ourselves as a society because we have to be quicker, faster, more economic in a way. So it would sort of deal with that age-old wish to contribute to something that is actually remaining long after, and that would be sort of like an expression of cultural conscience, or sort of something like that in a way. So if you would do this sort of stone crafting by hand, it would require a long time to actually maintain that craftsmanship. We talked about sort of
pass
very
it down
old,
generation to
very
generation.
old
You
Italian
lose
masters.
memory.
Yeah, it's lost in memory. But with the possibility of robotics, we could, or we can execute very fine details that would be unavailable for architects otherwise. And that would just be one example of how traditional craftsmanship, through carefully teaching the robot to execute these processes, could actually be stored or could be collected in an archive, almost like a craftsmanship archive, like Wikipedia, that would then be available all around the globe. For people who would actually like to look up these skills.
So in the future, when we can't do stone cutting anymore,
yes,
or we're too lazy,
because everybody is dead who could do it before.
Okay, so the robots will have the memory and be able to teach other robots and other humans?
Possibly, and this is actually what Willem Flusser says, an old Czech philosopher who actually said, at the moment we are in a period where we are teaching the robots. There will at some moment be a period of very intense collaboration where we're teaching each other, and then at some moment the robots will teach us. So the school of tomorrow is very much not even something that's web-based, but it's something that's action-based, that's process-based. So it's not something that you read or that you look at up in YouTube, but it's where the robot actually shows you or demonstrates to you techniques and crafts that would have been lost otherwise.
I think that's a very kind of interesting thing because it's machine or technology have done that for a long, long kind of time. So we can, through film recordings or photography, see objects or animals that don't really exist anymore. They've been preserved through that kind of machine, through that kind of technology. And obviously, those ones are different kind of forms of conserving them through a film or through a photograph, but actually the physical kind of whatever, the making of something that a robot arm or a robot could later teach somebody how to move certain kind of things or how to carve something in a stone is a very kind of interesting kind of concept.
Yeah, it's a really, it is actually quite interesting, the storing of memory in a completely other way.
I understand.
I concur.
I have a lot of difficulty with this one. I think it's a really interesting concept that we talk about a lot in this faculty about storing the memory of being able to do that. But coming from a background of fine woodwork, before I moved into this, I am just skeptical of how much we can really store. When I work with timber, there is just so much more than the angle of the saw that you hold when you cut a dovetail. It's the smell. It's all of your senses beyond the movement. So I think it's probably necessary for us to try and store as much as possible, but I think we'll get a tiny portion of what a skilled craftsperson does. Like,
as a human kind of experience, or kind of as a passing on kind of knowledge from one person to another, from a machine to a person?
I think crafts have traditionally been taught from master to apprentice, and so you don't learn everything on your own. You have someone teaching you.
Yeah.
I think having that master to apprentice, being robot to apprentice, I just anywhere near being able to do that, and
But it's a possibility, it's a future, and this is kind of something that you
Because it has
think about. It's like the future of how we collaborate with artificial intelligence or robots on design, on creativity. There is potential here.
But how is it going to learn and appreciate that piece of timber that you're holding in your hand, and the individual characteristics of it, all that? I think we're quite far off.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it's quite a romantic fantasy to think that there'll be some shed somewhere you can go and a robot will be teaching you how to...
Latch hook.
Yeah. I mean, if you take a really simple example is typography. So I guess lots of people know about typography, which is just how we put letters on paper or on a screen. I mean, originally that was a craft. People poured lead and carved the letters, and there was an intimate knowledge, a knowledge that extends throughout the body about how to put type in, about the feel and everything. And that's been completely... It's not like now that a computer teaches us about how to do hot metal type. It's that we have a digital process that completely replaced it because it was more efficient. And the idea of a person doing something and a machine doing something, the one fundamental difference is that in craft even, it involves communication between the person and the person making it and the person receiving it. Now, a robot can't, by definition, give that human communication. It can give some other kind of communication, and it could be recorded or understood from humans, which just makes it kind of parasitically meaningful. It's not meaningful in an original sense, and I think that's the fundamental difference between those things.
Good. So can I just pick on that? No, because I find that really interesting. We are all having this consensus that we would allow a robot to care for us when we are old and sick and can't really refuse that.
Not teach me
but we're saying, no, wait a minute, but we're not accepting, and that's not a romantic idea, because otherwise we would have sort of gone like, okay, no, we don't do that. But the craftsmanship would be a romantic idea. So I would like to know where the difference is between something that's so sensitive, where you're basically based on your own, with the machine in the room, where I basically had just proposed a sort of like, it's not even, sort of hierarchical system, but a sort of quid pro quo exchange where we can learn from each other. Where do you make that boundary between what's possible or what we can think and what we can't?
That is a good question.
It is a good question.
I think... wanted to answer it, but I need to be asking the questions.
You can have a go at answering. I mean, my answer would be, if you talk about medical care, I mean, if you look statistically at the mistakes doctors make, it's pretty horrific. Machines are much less likely to make those mistakes.
Same for the building industry?
Yeah.
No bricklayers or...
Sorry, but
if it's a question of accuracy
the machines
or...
are still being programmed by humans.
Machines can exceed humans in capability. So we have machines that can do better than the best player of Jeopardy, for example, that can beat the best human in the world. The best chess player in the world can be beaten. I'm sure very soon there will be machines that can certainly beat the best doctor in the world for accuracy. And if we have self-driving cars, we'll have machines that can drive better than the best humans because that's the only way insurance companies will
Except
actually
for
allow.
me, of course. I'm a great driver.
Yeah, well, I'm not, so I'd be happy to let a machine. So, yeah, you're right. There is a point of maybe contention there about what constitutes something that a robot can do and what it can't do, and it is very fine-grained. But if we're talking about something like craft or design...
Is a difference between what you were talking about before? It's about our decision. We want to show our own personal creativity. This is where what you're saying, the smell of the wood, the way I craft the wood, the happy accidents, the thing that makes us human is what we want to keep. We're more happy to give the job of looking after someone, just simply...
But I think it's also kind of a matter of generation. You said before, if your child born 2000, internet, didn't really know a world without the internet. So let be your child, whatever, in the 40s, in our kind of age, and then whatever the machines being more or less there to do kind of craft. For their children, probably it becomes completely normal that whatever you've been taught by a robot to do certain kind of craft kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
The question is then whatever, not really so the idea of why does the robot teaches the humans to craft? Why does the robot not only do the craft only by himself? Where's the machine then, or the human then still in the equation?
What are we going to do when our machines make everying for us and we don't make anything anymore?
I'm going to be sitting on a pina colada from the bot bar downstairs. Yeah, I have a question.
Well, it's a question and a kind of comment on just what you're talking about. It's an area that I've been thinking a lot about. In fact, I came up with a very nice acronym, because everyone likes a good acronym to describe the decision areas we're going to have to very soon make, and that's, I call it AMPET point, AMPET, for manufacturing, the Automated Manufacturing Price Equilibrium Threshold. And the point being that inexorably in a capitalist free enterprise markets, which the majority of the world is, and even China's going that way, obviously, if somebody doesn't do it, somebody else will, in terms of if something's cheaper to manufacture or cheaper to provide a service, then they eventually will. And that's what we're talking about, a price equilibrium threshold. They make a decision at a certain point. Is it we keep it because of aesthetics, or we like something that's handmade, or we just go purely for the fact that it's cheaper? There are a lot of other factors, obviously, because you have to take into things like workers' compensation. With bricklayers, for example, these days, we've been asked to work older and older, and it's often been said in political arguments that we can't ask people to work in heavy industries or in bricklaying because eventually their bodies wear out.
Yep.
And assuming modern medicine doesn't creep up in that way.
So just to
So the point is, and you can apply it to services or retail, and it's already happening. You see Amazon, they have very few people working.
So repetitive work, John, this is the thing, like, so for example, just to pick up where you're going, in the factories, like in Amazon, you just brought that up, how and also collaborative robotics as well, which is how can robots work with us to do the tasks that maybe do damage your body over the time, or are incredibly repetitive and boring? Yeah,
well, I think that's where they're actually being used right now in a lot of manufacturing, where I heard a statistic that the average age of a factory worker in the US is now 65 years old. Because a lot of those jobs just result in huge amounts of problems later in your life if you're still working. If you have a factory job all your life that involves lots of manual labour, you're likely to get a whole lot of back problems or muscle problems, all those kinds of things. Of course, a robot doesn't have that problem. So it's not a question of jobs being taken away, it's just the changing nature of work, and it's more interesting to do than just sitting on a production line putting widgets in boxes or whatever, or lifting things and putting them in pallets and those kinds of things, which robots do now very efficiently and very well.
So are they going to take our jobs?
Well, there's, you can look, if you just Google the top jobs to be taken by robots, it's quite interesting. I think accountants are about the
But it's the same kind of thing, but when machines took over in farming, and you look into the population who've been working in farming in the 1930s or 1920s, in comparison to now, they also found a job somewhere. So all those kind of people, also machines took the farming kind of jobs away, and they found a job somewhere. So I don't really think that machines will, yes, they will take off certain kind of jobs, but those kind of jobs will pop up in other kind of areas.
I think, yeah, there's always going to be the debate about ethics, about robots taking over, whatever. I think it's just the natural evolution of technology. So we barely get the mail delivered to our home. It's an email. We've gone from the home
There are no
to the phone to
typists
the mobile
anymore.
phone. It's not...
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
do we want typists?
new and hopefully more interesting jobs get created
and
to replace the...
That's right. Question?
Hi. Technology's already come into education in a vast way. If you're having a look at the online learning environment, and your comment earlier about teaching crafts and skills through using robots, why is it that we still have a university like this with lecturers and professors like yourselves? Because people yearn that love of the subject, and no matter how well you design your online, you are never going to partake or transmit that love of the subject. I've designed chemistry online material, and no matter how hard I try, you cannot replace a person that loves that piece of wood and can inspire the young person to want to create something magical out of it. But if it comes to a... Sorry.
Because our job is now in risk. Yes, whatever, robots are evil. No.
No, I don't think they're evil, but I think what they do is that they have the incredible patience to repeat and repeat and repeat and consolidate a concept. Whether it's your extension student who cannot wait 5 minutes or 2 minutes till you get to the next point, or whether it's your student that missed that concept or that they're away that day and therefore lose that flow. Because what we don't have in today's population, particularly in this country, is the luxury of a wasted generation. We used to waste about 70% of our young people and really only put the education into about 30%. We can't do that anymore. If you look at the intergenerational reports, etc., there's only 2 working people to support 1 person that's retired. We don't have that luxury, so we now have to come up with new ways.
New ways of doing it. Thank you. There's a question at the back, and actually I want to talk about John's work in a minute too. That's okay.
Sure.
You're good.
Hey, so due to the very real potential I see of people not being able to afford human-made goods in the future or services due to robotics getting cheaper, is there a responsibility to engineer ethical practices in robots, and what are the implications of doing that?
Is there a subject called robot aesthetics or ethics?
Sure, yeah, there
I think
is.
there is something.
Yeah.
What ethics?
Ethics.
Ethics, yeah.
Isaac Asimov.
Yeah, it started with Isaac,
Yeah.
well, maybe even before him. So, yeah, I mean, I think anything we make, we insert ethics into. Any machines that we've made. I mean, we put horns on cars. That's an ethical decision to warn people about things. It's also quite annoying if you live
I
in a
actually
busy
thought you
street.
meant horns.
Well, people did with that too. Yeah, so I think, I mean, it is a really interesting question, particularly if you're talking about autonomous machines that can make decisions for themselves. What kind of ethical decisions do we want to allow them to make, particularly when we're talking about machines that are used in war situations, for example, so smarter and smarter weapons that are making decisions on behalf of nation states or even individuals. It's a really, really interesting question, and I don't think there's a simple answer.
And it will change and transform, I imagine, as time goes on.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at drones, is a really interesting one now because we're just on the edge of them becoming a consumer device, and they're starting to get more and more autonomy. So apart from the fact that they're really annoying, they're also quite dangerous. So we want to build in lots of safeguards, but then how much does that start to limit what they can do and who they can interact with and so on? And particularly if they're used by the police, the armed forces or whatever, to spy on people or to monitor them and do all those kinds of things that often technology is employed to do. The ethics varies between countries, between groups about what's right and what's wrong.
So the question of regulation is a big one.
Yeah, but also I think regulation has to be shaped by consensus by people, not by just governments making up the rules as they go along. And generally, as everyone knows, technology moves way faster than regulators do. So the technology appears, all these bad things happen and they go, quick, we better regulate against it. And that's going to happen more and more frequently.
Thank you. Question at the back?
If I can ask you a question, this is a bit of a fast-forward thing. We're going fast-forward. I remember reading the Flash Gordon and the Green Lantern comics from the 20s and the 30s, being a bit of a comic book fiend, but they said how robotic creatures, robotic people would be the ones who would colonise the planets in the future. They would go to the planets, and they had one Flash Gordon comic book where the robots had become so technologically advanced that they amalgamated themselves and then came back and reinvaded the Earth. this is the science fiction side of it, but I've seen on television where in California they have robotic corporations which have android robots which live off plasma cells. They can sort of create replicas like Android, like Blade Runner, and things like that. So the technology seems to be so advanced.
Well, your first Flash Gordon kind of vision where robots will populate foreign planets have already happened. So the Mars robot is a robot that just is the only citizen at the moment on planet Mars.
Yes.
I'm not really sure if he ever comes back with his friends. I don't think so. But that is definitely kind of happening.
He'll be laying bricks soon, actually.
I've seen a very kind of interesting kind of picture there. The first selfie took on Mars. So the robot took a selfie of himself on Mars, which I found.
Did he have to take it 5 times so he looked pretty?
But he shared his kind of selfie at least with other kind of people. I don't know really if and I think that's again when I said before that 8 out of 10 robots try to kill you. I think we always go through certain kind of cycles of a very optimistic technology kind of view. Whoever who've been about teenage in the 60s had a very kind of optimistic kind of view. I've been growing up in the 80s, far more pessimistic. Robots had the voice of Arnold Schwarzenegger, sounded a little bit like me. Then that just went down and slowly goes up. I think our students we have at the moment being kind of more onto optimistic kind of rise again. And probably a lot of you in your generation had the positive to negative to positive now, which is kind of quite confusing to what to believe in robotics and technology. And I think that's part of the kind of game. Sometimes have the feeling when we talk about technology that we could have a very similar conversation 100 years ago. The technology would have been different, but we would have the same kind of concerns.
Yeah, but we are now we are confronted with a technology which is completely different to anything that we have realized before. So we don't really talk about kinetic machines. Yeah, we're talking about systems that are intelligent, that are sensitive, that can grow, that are capable of evolution, which may be capable of empathy, right? So we are literally creating animate entities. So my question is really, if we're sort of extrapolating that, if you create something that is animate, what rights do you have to take control over that? And what rights do you have if then there's a situation where you are competitive with that entity? What right do you have to assume that you have the older rights to exist there? So that's really, so I really like that Flash Gordon example. I think at some moment we are possibly designing ourselves out of the equation. I'm completely sure of that. So I'm just.
There's a difference between animate and sentient.
It may be a German language problem. What I'm assuming is if you make something that's intelligent and that's empathic, if you have something that is a living entity, so to speak, then you don't really have a possibility to take that away from them. Them, not it. Yeah, but we talk like we have very quick developments, right? So we talk about a complete change of our worlds, everybody's world, within 7 years. Yeah. So we are now working with an incremental growth due to technology. So everything will just speed up fast, right? So if I say 30 years,
get cheaper things.
Yeah, no, it's gotta explode.
Yes. Okay. Let's move on to the next question. Thank you.
So continuing on the ethics theme, but a bit more current, I think, is we haven't had anyone mention really the concentration of power as the other kind of dimension of the ethics discussion, and we're in a situation like already, or maybe very soon, Gina Reinhardt has trains that are driving by themselves and managing her minds, and I guess in the extreme future we've got the potential that someone can design and build a skyscraper or a city, like a single person can do that. So that's really absurdly extreme concentrations of power. So how do we deal with that? And I mean, what's specific about architecture and fabrication in that particular area?
We'll regulate when it happens.
Marjo?
difficult. Dagmar, do you want to jump in first?
No, I would like to ask for, like, what's that concentration of power? Because no one is just going to build a skyscraper in a day, no matter how hard we try. So can you just explain that a little bit more?
Well,
You're saying one person owns the rights.
Well, I don't see. I mean, if we're talking kind of distant future scenarios, I don't see why that's not a possibility.
Well,
I
I'd
mean,
like to
basically,
employ that person to work downstairs.
well, you've got 3 robots, so yeah. I mean, that's exactly the point. I think of. I mean, this is we're talking about this replacing of jobs, which I don't think the replacement of jobs is an issue in terms of those people who have those jobs, but what we're talking about when we're talking about that is the fact that there's this huge scalability. Like what a single person can do is constantly being increased. That's increases in productivity. But we're seeing that kind of go through the hockey stick, skyrocket, exponential process. And I think that with various levels of AI and machine capability, for example, robots that can build robots and all that kind of very futuristic, but probably actually just around the corner kind of technology, the scalability kind of explodes, and those kinds of scenarios aren't completely out of the question.
Okay. I'll take that as a comment.
I don't know if that's not. Just teasing. I think that's already happening in other areas. So
It's sort of interesting to me because actually each of you have said, I mean, this is very futuristic, of course, but maybe it's already happening. But I mean, you're struggling to even get a robot to draw a straight line, downstairs. Is that right?
It takes some time. Yeah.
It takes some time.
Not
You're trying to
that
get a
much
robot
time
to make
anymore.
a drink, and I went down there before, and it spilt my drink.
So which is...
I mean, we're not quite there yet, is my point, or are we?
And that's kind of the point, so just to show you example quickly.
Yes.
Which one is human, which one is machine? Can you see those kind of two things?
Which one is beautiful and which one's too precise? I made one of them, let's say that.
But I think that's the thing as well with robots. So to make the robot to do that, there's a lot of kind of time involved into programming that. To do this, probably in the same kind of time, you could slowly practice and learn those kind of skills as well. I think the idea that robot fabrication or robots just pressing a button and then the thing works is illusion as well. There's a lot of kind of time involved in actually making, particular, I think what we try to do in architecture, where it's not always the same kind of movement over and over again, but each kind of movement is completely individual. It requires a lot of kind of time of programming, of considering trial and error.
Of artistry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're going to go to a question, but I want to quickly ask John about, because we're talking with people who are working in architecture and design, and you work in quite a different field. So what is the difference, the point of difference between your research when it comes to creativity and design than what you've been listening to today?
So, well, I guess I'm really interested in the idea of creativity and making machines that are creative, not independently creative, but ones that work with you to improve your own creativity. And I think that's this kind of, I mean, it's really easy for us to sit here and speculate about what the future might be like, but somebody has to make the future, and it hasn't been written yet. And I think the more we try to defer our creativity to machines, the more dangerous it is. But if we think about computers as being creative partners, ones that we can work with, that inspire us, that give us ideas, that learn from us and understand us, then it becomes much more an interesting proposition, because we can think about new forms of creativity that haven't ever existed before.
Yeah, brand new ideas to write music, to play music in a live environment,
in every
make art.
Every form of things that we, as humans, we love to do. I mean, every culture has a musical tradition. They're all different, but every culture has a musical tradition. Most cultures have a drawing or some other form of what we now call art tradition. And to have machines enter as part of that tradition is a really interesting idea, I think. And so to try and make machines that don't compete with us but enhance us and complement us is, I think, a much more noble goal than having something that you just put your feet up and it does everything for you. Do you really want to go and see an exhibition at a gallery that was completely done by machines? It might be amazing. But
kind of.
Yeah. But I mean, the first one, of course, everyone will want to go and see. But after the 500th or the 5 millionth exhibition, because they can just keep doing it, is it really going to be interesting for people to do that?
So you're talking, we have to have agency then. We have to
collaborate.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, there's different forms of agency. So I mean, in a nutshell, artificial intelligence, the early days, the approach was to try and reverse engineer the human brain to do it as a top down. And it was thought that by putting enough rules into the computer, you would get something out that was intelligent. And millions or hundreds of millions of dollars was spent on research that didn't end up delivering that. I mean, lots of other good things came out of it. Then the idea came that maybe there's a bottom-up approach, that you can start with something simple and let the creativity emerge, let the intelligence emerge rather than trying to program it in. And that opens up a whole lot of really interesting possibilities because you're not engineering the intelligence, you're engineering the process that makes the intelligence, and the intelligence emerges. So you don't have any idea about what the creativity or intelligence that emerges is going to be, which I think is really exciting, but it's also quite dangerous too, because you have to forgo control over what you create.
Oh, this kind of gets into what you were talking about before, Marjo, as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and actually for giving you a pause to think about
Yes.
it. Which I think the interesting in architecture is from the top-down approach. Architecture is a very kind of top-down approach. You've got a director say, gives you a sketch and say, here it is, make it kind of happen. So top-down. And I think the bottom-up approach in architecture, which through computation, where you set certain kind of parameters, and that kind of parameters through the machine defines an object, a shape, a building, and then the machine actually can produce that, is quite interesting for me as well. So I think for me, with robot fabrication, having not really the predicted, I know what the outcome is because I sketched it before, and then the robot builds it. Why it's more the other one, we don't really know what the outcome could be. We've got certain kind of parameters in a system, like the wind speed, the location, having an evolutionary kind of algorithm that just then generates that, do certain kind of forms, and then there's kind of one form as an outcome, and the machine is able to build it. And you only can do so through robot fabrication. It's, I think, an interesting kind of point.
Certainly. Thank you. Question at the back.
Yes, I just like to put aside artificial intelligence and the complexities there and ask for some predictions from you as to what pervasive transformational outcomes will those robots deliver in 5 or 6 years to our built environment?
Okay.
Was everyone doing it?
7 years, iPhone became pervasive. In 7 years, what
What are we
pervasive
gonna- so what are we gonna
changes
see in
will happen
7 years?
because of robots?
If you look at history, so automation, car automation how long has it been going now?
71 years.
So 40 years. Architecture and the building industry last non-automated industry. 7 years, probably not a lot. But we've been, we haven't figured out how to do it in architecture. That's the thing. We don't, there's prefabricated housing. For some reason, we still don't do prefabricated housing with robots. We build prefabricated houses indoors, and that's what we consider. And they're not robotized. I think for me personally, I think that's probably the first area that will become robotized, but I don't think we'll have robot-built buildings in 5 to 7 years.
But for
I
me,
think
probably
there are some. Sorry, there are some building. There's a building I know that's been planned that's going to be built by robots already.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
But sorry, if there may be some experimental ones, but I can't see us moving that quickly.
Mainstream, yeah.
I don't think robots in architecture are like iPhones. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's a 5 to 7 year cycle.
It's going to take a while,
That's-
but elements of it will happen.
Yeah,
So, for
there'll
example,
be a lot
the
of
fabricating that you're doing, Dagmar.
No, but I'm actually not. I'm disagreeing with that. If we really wanted that, we would have these changes, and we would have them now. So, like, we could set up an office tomorrow and prefabricate and custom make houses to plan, where people just come and say, okay, this is my site. Here's the north aspect. I want so and so much square meter volume, and we're going to build that as a wood construction. And we could go in tomorrow and route these houses. So I have no idea why we don't do that.
So
Probably
is it about
because
desire?
we're working in this faculty here, so because we're academics. So, but if you want to go and do it, then let's do it tomorrow.
I think so. There's
That would be a problem.
a colleague from us in Stuttgart, Achim Menges, built for the annual garden show in southern Germany a house that is completely robot fabrication that has been fulfilling the German regulations for construction and could stand there as a house. It's a pavilion, it's not a house where people live, but at the end it has a roof, it has doors, it has windows and all kind of things. So it could be considered as a house. And
But does it have amenities and services, toilets and
Yes,
all
of
those
course,
things?
you
I mean,
can do all of
that's
that.
the problem. Is
That's
that
not
you
the
still
problem.
need.
You need to collaborate. But
So
that's,
the problem is we are still at the point where you need to get in the electrician. We're not getting in the plumbing and the electricals and turn everything into anything prefabricated. Like, to my understanding, we're quite far off just in prefabricated housing. You're still getting in the tradespeople to put in all the services after the
skilled
construction.
work.
So we're fabricating shells, we're not fabricating homes.
Yeah, but we've just been agreeing that we don't want to replace human labor, so we would just sort of give the really boring work of fabricated individual types pieces for a specific site, produce them robotically, and then let craftsmanship assemble the parts. So that's not going to be a problem.
Next question.
This is kind of in comment on some of the conversations which just happened in the last 5 minutes, but I think there's a creative gap missing from the whole way that we think about robots and construction and architecture, whereby we're repurposing robots from the automotive industry to do remedial tasks like bricklaying and prefab housing, that kind of thing, rather than thinking about what can the machine create differently. So 20 years ago, I was reading about nano-robots that could build skyscrapers silently and without people having any interaction. They could self-replicate and self-build, and there would be no mess, no waste. But we're not seem to be concentrating on that. How do educational institutions fill that gap? How do they come up with the creative thought to come up with new ways of building rather than concentrating on repurposing old technology?
Really kind of the question that obviously in an architecture design school you teach students to design kind of buildings. And the other kind of problem is if you've been in a mechatronic engineering kind of department, you learn how to design and build the machines. So probably through more collaboration to say, well, a design of a machine that can design later a house or work on the house design has to look like that. So the moment most mechatronic engineers study and learn to fabricate machines for a car manufacturing, other kind of manufacturing industry, not for the construction industry. So potentially, in answering your kind of question, having both kind of faculties working closer together, that suddenly a manufacturing engineer or mechatronics engineer understand, well, hold on, there's a career in construction industry for me as well, might change the kind of game. Because at the end, we use tools, we don't really produce the kind of tools. We want to create something with the tools, but we don't really make the tools. So maybe there is a kind of a potential, and that's maybe again in the job market. Car industry is just breaking away in Australia. All those kind of people who thought they will have a secure kind of job in a car manufacturing industries have a shock awakening now, not finding a job anymore, or if you're studying mechatronics engineering, you can't really work there anymore. So maybe the construction industry will be a new kind of area. With having to build whatever for 1 million more people houses in the cities next kind of 10 years. I would say there's a lot of kind of work to be done.
Dagmar?
Yeah, but I find that really interesting because it's basically I think the mistakes that we're still making in robotic fabrication, or which is why this next conference in March will be so interesting, is when we get the sensing in. Because if we treat the robot as the robot, it's just a tool. So whatever you predetermine is going to be executed. But once we understand that the robot is also then connected to the computer and connected to all the knowledge that is around there and connected to some specific aspect of sensing, then he can actually assess potentially a site and see what can be done under these local conditions. So rather than doing some pre-planning for a Tamarama and having a really hard time with this sort of granite wall in which you want to build, he could potentially cut out what he needs to cut out and repurpose that material, that's the offcut, to actually construct then a stone house. Or you could send him out to the woods and he would assess certain trees, scan those trees, see how old they are, see how much the material is available, and then to sort of redraw the house based on what is locally available on site. That's going to be something that's going to be interesting for the future.
So we won't need
of
architects
construction
anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think architects would then sort of be still the designers of these systems.
The
so
aesthetic judgment I
But
said
they're like a
before.
glue. So what you're saying is almost that the robots themselves can be a glue between the real world, our
and I think
here,
that,
and the digital world. So the source, the wealth of information that's out there.
And that's the capacity to have them as a brain and the hand, and not just as the brainless hand or just as the brain.
I really agree with Dagmar about the sensors. That's the next thing that we really need to move into. Even if you come and, I hope you'll come and have a cocktail after this made by the robot, and you will see. It's going to spill drinks. We unfortunately finished the programming on Thursdays, like I use we liberally.
I sometimes spill drinks too, so it's all right.
Oh, okay, so it's
Replicating the
probably
human,
quite
which is what we're
human.
talking about here.
The robot had a few drinks before it served the drinks.
After 3 martinis, you'll be spilling drinks.
But the thing that I learned most about working with robots is just how complex we are. It's a really simple thing, but we are really complex as humans. And when you take a really simple process like making a cocktail, it's not the simplest process, but just doing all those things, knowing where the glass is so you don't miss it, just sensing where the glass is. When you break down every single process of just making one cocktail, and then how many senses you would need to do that perfectly, where the robot knows how to do it intuitively rather than being programmed, you start to see how complex it is to, so please come and see a spilled cocktail, and then take that knowledge into construction. There's a lot.
There's lots of steps to get there.
Yeah.
Another question? Yes? Questions? There we go. Microphone, yes, thank you.
It's great to see you picking up on the sensors because it's a move to outcomes. I just feel like the discussion's been a bit around outputs, which are kind of objects, where really the outcomes is sustainability. So in 7 years, that will become a very pressing issue, and empathic responses to the human condition. So I think until a university kind of gets its neuroscientists and sustainability experts and maybe the quantum computing experts, the woman who just won the Eureka Prize, so you can actually put the information in and judgment is applied with higher goals, if you like, rather than just cost efficiency. And then I think you'll get robots redefined and fulfilling their place, but while we still operate in knowledge silos, I just can't see it happening soon.
Thank you.
It is, it shows really with technology that whatever silos of education really have to crumble, or you start kind of new things that become silos in the future will emerge. I think it's absolutely kind of essential. We started a new bachelor degree in computational design where we very actively looking into getting biology with mechatronics, with engineering, with architecture, design all together. And I think that the beautiful thing for me of being in a university is to get those informations mainly for a price of a cup of a coffee. You contact a colleague, ask him to come for a coffee, have a chat, and after a cup of a coffee, you have a lot of kind of new information. But making students work together and making staff working closer together is quite a challenge still. And I think that's definitely kind of a point.
Okay, one more question? Or 2 more questions then.
Just back to the creativity discussion, which I think probably John's already answered this question, but the idea of robots being too accurate, I was thinking about the stonemason and the woodworking. I understand why they're necessary and you can program it, but a bit like the Sibelius software for writing music, as I understand it, it can be too accurate. There's not the nuances, there's not the difference in when it's performed by this orchestra with this conductor. It's just. I think are we still a long way away from robots being able to have that sort of nuance that you need for creative. Knowing when to shave that bit of wood or that bit of marble, etc.
Too precise.
Well, certainly robots can be more precise than the best human. And I think the answer to your question is probably, no, I don't think that's a problem. I think it's quite easy to make a robot do something badly, or to do it with what we might say a humanised variation. So that means not being as precise as the robot can be. And certainly you see that in a lot of modern software, that people actually reject that sort of idea of super mathematical purity and absolute precision, because it does signify something about a machine that a human can't do. But that's quite a romantic notion too, in the sense that what we're liking is the fact that we're not that good at doing something, but we value the fact that we're not that good because we understand the humility of making and working with materials.
I would add to the precision comment. In my early days of woodwork, when I made my first hand-cut veneer table and cut the veneers, and overnight came back, and it was a particularly dry night, and I came back and each piece had shrunk by 1 millimetre, and so my table was 1 centimetre narrower than I had intended. you can't account for materiality still. So materiality changes. Everything swells, expands, contracts, shrinks, does whatever it does, and that's what I think we're still. Besides all the I won't get into appreciating each piece of timber or whatever. Yeah, I think the nuances are far off.
Right. So it's up to you. Who's a designer in this room? Who's an architect? You're not so proud architects, but designers you are. Is anybody a roboticist? Or a robot person? No?
Roboticist is the right.
Okay. Who has a robot at home of any kind? I've got a washing machine, so we've all got one. They're all liars. That's
great. Bar too low at the beginning.
You did, yeah. That's really interesting. Who would let a robot look after them when they're elderly? You would? Would you let a robot drive your car? I've got to think of more questions here. Would you let a robot marry you and be a celebrant? Yeah. Not if you're gay, not with Tony Abbott around. Yeah. That's really interesting.
You changed the question.
I did.
Would you let a robot marry you?
Oh,
sure.
Yeah, true. Oh, what about heart surgery? That's a great question. Would you let a robot do surgery on you?
So there are actually robotic surgeons already. There's a machine, I think it's called Da Vinci, rather ironically named, that is very expensive. There's none in Australia, but there's some overseas that do actually perform surgery robotically.
Well, they can do that right now. They can perform.
Yeah. So, but often there's a surgeon driving them. So
Yeah.
the next step is actually not to have the surgeon directly driving them.
It's also about the boundary between human and machine just shrinks more and more. If you really think you've got a pacemaker in your body, that's a machine in your body that helps you to lift, or if you have an artificial kind of limb, it's a machine as well that has a battery inside and responses and can be pre-programmed. I think the whole kind of notion between human and machine shrinks more and more over the years.
We'll all start looking like Will Smith and iRobot before you know it. We have to wrap up, but there is one question here. So,
I feel like there's beginning to be two forces in the discussion, and it's either we are inherently flawed and we need to be replaced, and we are special and we cannot be replaced. So do you feel like the discussion always seems to bounce between these two? Is there a middle ground, or will one always win?
I think I'm special.
Everyone likes to think they're special. I agree there is some kind of dichotomy there that's maybe slightly contradictory. I mean, we're human. We have biases. We have opinions. They're not necessarily grounded in facts or reality all the time. And we can't avoid that. That's just part of who we are. And yet, the machines we try and make they're always about idealisations of ourselves. What do we want the best person to be like? What do we want the best player at this game, or the best artist, or the best architect to be able to do? And that's the aspiration, but of course the aspiration's never met, and that's just life, right? It sucks some of the time, and we
keep
do our
asking
best.
those questions.
Yeah, we keep
I think
asking
it's always
that
going to be a
question.
battle, certainly. So, okay, let's just wrap up with one quick question. What's the one thing you'd want robotics in your life to do? You don't want to do it anymore. What do you want? Anything?
What did you say?
Yeah, we've already got that.
What did you say? No, like top to bottom, totally.
Top to bottom, clean your house.
Yep.
Dagmar, what do you want desperately? I want to be 100 years in the future. I want it right now.
Carry me to Darwin.
Carry you to Darwin?
Yeah, like
physically carry you?
Yeah.
A robot to carry you to Darwin? That's interesting. So bizarre, but that's fantastic. We could actually all do that together. We could do this as a humans.
For me, it'd be do my lectures for me.
Yeah, right. That gets back to what our friend in the audience is saying. Hank?
Can't really answer. There are probably many kind of things. Helping with public transport, probably.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Rationality.
World peace. Yeah, world peace. I want someone to make me a beautiful organic meal every night.
Just make the world a better place.
Make the world a better place. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you that there's this really hot and sexy conference happening next year about robots and architecture, surprise, surprise, and it's on the 15th to the 19th of March, and it's in one of the most gorgeous locations in Sydney at Walsh Bay, Pier 2-3, which is that one that still hasn't been developed inside and quite gorgeous. So you know the one. And these guys are the co-chairs of the conference. It happens every 2 years. It's a really important, amazing thing. Tell your friends, come to the conference, tweet.
Bring your robots.
Bring your robots. Do you do that?
We'll have robots
Oh
there.
my
Yep.
God, it's going to be so great. So there's flyers on your chair, and put that in your diary. So March 15th to the 19th. And I've got to say, what a wonderful panel, and thank you so much for inviting me to present today. But Marjo, Niemelä, John McCormack, Dagmar Reinhardt, and also Hauessler. Give them a huge round of applause.